Hello and welcome to the virtual series Beyond Borders, brought to you by the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. My name is Ricky Bevington. I am president of the council. This is a dialogue series led by Ambassador Charles Shapiro, former U.S. ambassador to Venezuela, and also president emeritus of the council. And he'll lead each dialogue with world-class experts in their fields of study and practice. And today's program is entitled Diplomacy Disrupted: How Cuts to U.S. Agencies Are Reshaping Foreign Policy. Thank you for those of you who have joined us and who are continuing to join us. A little bit about the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership organization, and we're dedicated to amplifying informed thought leadership that prompts new thinking on critical global issues. Throughout the year, we feature diplomats, dignitaries, executives, and subject matter experts providing world-class analysis of geopolitics, foreign policy, trade and the economy, emerging technologies, armed conflict, climate change, health and humanitarian issues, and many more topics. Please subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about our work and upcoming programs at wacatlanta.org. Some housekeeping. This program is on the record. The statements made today are those of the speaker and not of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. And our featured expert speakers for today's conversation are Eric Rubin, former U.S. ambassador to Bulgaria and president of the American Foreign Service Association, although I do believe there is a leadership change happening. You can tell us more about that, Ambassador Rubin. Along with Philip Shull, senior agricultural diplomat and former executive with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Foreign Agricultural Service. And we hope, Mr. Shull, you'll tell us more about that as well. So today's topic is familiar to anyone who has followed U.S. domestic news since January. In a series of sweeping and controversial moves, the Trump administration has dismissed thousands of government employees across key institutions that form the backbone of America's national security, humanitarianism, and global engagement. These have included the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the Department of State, the Voice of America, and the National Security Council and other agencies. And of course, the scale and speed of these personnel cuts have raised urgent questions about the future of U.S. diplomacy, as well as international development and the country's ability to project what we call soft power on the global stage. That is the topic that we are going to be discussing today. Questions like, what are the long-term implications of hollowing out the diplomatic corps? How might these changes affect America's influence abroad? And many of your questions. We are inviting audience questions. Charles, Ambassador Shapiro, will give you some instructions on how to do that. We want to make sure this conversation is as inclusive as possible, and that we get to as many of your questions as we can answer as well. So with that, here to lead this conversation is Ambassador Charles Shapiro. Charles will lead a moderated discussion for about 30 minutes and then turn to audience questions. And with that, I am very pleased to welcome Ambassador Charles Shapiro to introduce our speakers today. Take it away, Charles.
Thanks, Ricky. I appreciate it. And before I introduce Ambassador Rubin and Philip Shull to the audience, if you want to ask a question, please, I assume you've done this before, but at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's something that says Q&A. And you put your cursor over that Q&A and use that. Do not use the chat function, because I'm not going to be looking at the chat function. And I see we've already got one question at least, so somebody's really ahead of themselves. You might want to listen to what we say for a few minutes. But please make the questions short so that I don't have to edit them while I'm reading them. Okay, that would help me a lot. So as Ricky said, we've got World Affairs Council invites world-class experts. Got our world-class experts for today, our Ambassador Eric Rubin, who until last week, if I'm not mistaken, was the president of the American Foreign Service Association. Eric served in a number of key posts, including Kiev, Chiang Mai, and Moscow. His final post abroad was as U.S. Ambassador to Bulgaria. Philip Shull is a retired member of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Foreign Agriculture Service. His last post before retiring was as Counselor for Agriculture at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. which is the single largest and most important foreign agricultural service post. I'm assuming that's because they are our biggest single client for ag exports. So let me welcome you both, Eric and Phil, and I hope you're okay with me calling y'all Eric and Phil. Welcome to Atlanta. That's how it works here. And I'm going to start with you, Eric. My next door neighbors, my relatives, all think they know what diplomats do. And they think that's going to receptions and, dressing up nice. And anyhow, could you explain very quickly, let's take 30 seconds, describe what State Department does, how many employees it has, so that we've all got a basic understanding. And then when Eric finishes, Phil, I want you to do the same.
Okay, great. I'll probably need a minute, not 30 seconds. Just one clarification up front. I finished as president of the American Foreign Service Association 2 years ago, so I'm emeritus. We do have a new president who just took office today. We can talk more about that if you'd like. But the State Department has approximately 75,000 employees. That makes it the second smallest federal department after the Department of Education. The vast majority of those people are foreign citizens who work for our embassies and consulates overseas. About 55,000 of them are foreign citizens. We have approximately 23,000 Americans working for the State Department, which is a tiny number in federal government terms. About 10,000 of them are civil service permanent employees who stay in one job indefinitely unless they move and stay in the United States generally, except for work travel. And then we have about 13,000 people who are in the U.S. Foreign Service, which is a separate corps. It's our diplomatic service. And they serve both in the United States in Washington and sometimes in other places, and overseas at our embassies and consulates. The main missions are, first and foremost, protecting and supporting American citizens overseas. If you get in trouble, you get arrested, you lose your passport, you have an accident overseas, it's our people who are there to help their fellow Americans if you need a new passport, etc. Second mission is government to government communications. We're the ones who actually conduct relations for our government, for our president administration with foreign countries. And it's also advice to the president and the senior officials on developments overseas, reporting, analysis. And finally, it's administrating programs. Our embassies and consulates overseas are platforms for doing all sorts of things. A lot of law enforcement, a lot of counterterrorism, a lot of counter-narcotics, a lot of security assistance, a lot of military to military assistance, all of which is done out of our embassies and consulates under our ambassadors. So that's a quick snapshot.
That's great. So Phil, over to you.
All right. Well, USDA is a large organization with about 100,000 people, but the Foreign Ag Service has less than 1,000. So about 300 of us are Foreign Service officers that cover 180 countries from about 100 different posts. We have about 300 overseas locally engaged staff. That is, as Eric mentioned, are the people we depend on who are permanent employees at the embassy but are locally engaged. And so they are often the experts there and have the long relationships that we rely on. FAS has two primary missions. First is to promote exports of all U.S. food and agricultural products. So it's not just wheat and soybeans and livestock, but also includes peanut butter and wine and soup to nuts, really. And then we also are trying to advance global food security. And so all the programs we do are related to that. The main way we do that is try to break down barriers to trade. Those can be through formal trade negotiations, or they can be and this is what we prefer, do it informally through the good relationships we have with the host government officials. We also write lots of different reports freely available to the public and to the industry on all manner of food and agricultural products going on, developments that are going on in the country and the policies that are relevant to those. And then the other thing we do is provide direct assistance to our food and agricultural companies. We'll sponsor trade shows. We'll also, if you come and see us, provide direct one-on-one assistance and advice on how to break into the market and what are some of the things we could look at. We also have a very small food assistance program, development assistance program, which has gone the way of AID. And so that is no longer being funded.
Eric, what happened last Friday? I mean, there's articles in the newspapers yesterday and today. What happened at State Department last Friday? How many people were cut? And can you categorize, was it by function? Was it by years of service? Was it by what did these people who were fired, were they low performers, high performers?
So let me start out by saying that I spent almost 40 years in the Foreign Service at the State Department, and my last 4 years as president of our professional association and union. I've been talking, and most of my colleagues have been talking about the need for reform and restructuring really our entire careers. So, I'm starting from the perspective that change has been needed for a long time. But what happened last Friday was not positive change. What happened last Friday was really a poorly executed and incoherent reduction in staffing at the State Department, driven really by just a desire to get numbers to reduce staffing. And I have to emphasize, there was no budget shortfall. Every position at the State Department was funded by Congress. There was no deficit or need to cut people for financial reasons. We had on the books regulations for how people could be laid off in a reduction in force. Those regulations were decades old, had been updated over the years, and they were focused on performance, on the record that people had, and really focused on the idea of who do we want to keep, who has the skills and talent and demonstrated experience, so that if we have to let people go, we let people go who are the least important in our organization. This administration, a few months ago, unilaterally rewrote those regulations, and there's now a court case about whether they did that properly and legally. But the key point is they rewrote those regulations to enable them to let go of people based on where they worked in the organization, not on their track record, not on their performance evaluations, not on their skills, not on their experience, but basically where they worked as of a certain day in May of this year, with the idea that the administration has set out to eliminate bureaus and offices in the State Department that they don't think should exist, whose work over the past decades is not something they believe should continue, which is fundamentally something that an administration, any administration, has the right to do in consultation with Congress. And that's important because restructuring a federal agency almost always legally requires congressional consent and consensus, most of which was not requested or received in this case. But what happened is they said, okay, let's say we want to get rid of almost everybody in our Refugee Programs Bureau because we don't intend to admit refugees into the United States during this administration, with a few exceptions. So anybody who worked in that bureau as of May, a certain date in May, is going to be on the list for being RIFed. That both
explain to our audience what RIF means.
Yeah, RIF means reduction in force. It means laid off in plain English. And there have always been regulations on the books to allow for that. But there are a couple of problems with that. One, in any organization, if you're going to lay people off, it makes sense to determine who you want to lay off based on, again, their track record, their performance, what their potential is, what their skills are, what their experience is. Not where they were working at the time. You can move people. That's what leaders can do. You can reassign people. You can retrain them. You can do all sorts of things. The second thing is the Foreign Service is an organization basically structured like the military, where people rotate every 2 or 3 years from one assignment to another, either in the US or overseas. And where they're working at one particular time is really not relevant. They take a 2-year assignment and then they move on. And this reduction in force, this layoff, essentially ignored that. Most of the people laid off were permanent civil service employees, about 1,100 of them, but 250 were members of the Foreign Service, and they were let go based on where they were working in May, not almost anything else. There was a chart, saying, tell us your skills and how many languages you speak, but it only affected people in the bureaus and offices that the administration wanted to reduce or eliminate. So anyone who had the bad luck in the Foreign Service to be assigned to one of those bureaus or offices in the past couple of years, all of a sudden is facing the early end of their career. And in some cases, we've had people who were about to transfer overseas, in a couple of cases as the number twos, the deputy chiefs of mission at some of our embassies overseas, who were about to leave with their families, and they were told, well, at the time we took the snapshot in May, you were still working in one of these offices we're eliminating, so you're laid off. You're not going next week to be number two at this embassy. Well, first of all, that makes no sense. Second of all, the administration wrote these regulations, so they can't claim they're constrained by them because they just rewrote them. And also, that means we're not going to have a deputy chief of mission, a number two, a deputy to the ambassador at an embassy overseas at a time when half of our ambassadorships are vacant. This is now a subject of a fight between the Senate and the Trump administration on getting ambassadors out to post. So I have to say, this is really not about reform. It's not about streamlining. It was about being able to say, I think, to the White House, to the Office of Management and Budget, we cut X number of people. That's our achievement. And the last thing I'll say is the State Department is the second smallest agency in the federal government. It's tiny compared to most of the big ones. And yet it is the first agency to do these layoffs, to do these RIFs. And that makes no sense given how small it is. And I do have one more point to make. Colin Powell, when he came in as Secretary of State in 2001, said, coming from his military background, I can't believe you don't do long-term training. I can't believe you don't do professional education and development. In the military, it's not only essential, it's required. There are no exceptions. There's no way to get out of it. Everybody gets it because they have to have it. And to have that, you need what's called a training float, which means you need to have enough people that people can take a year off or 6 months off and do training. We haven't had that really ever. And now we're not going to have anything close to it, which is just going to reduce the skills and the capabilities of our people. I'll stop there.
Okay, one quick follow-up question, hopefully with a quick answer. Just so make sure I understand this. This was designed inside State Department, the reductions in force, not by the White House, not by the National Security Council, but at state itself.
I can't tell you the true answer to that because there's no transparency and we don't know. Officially, this was done inside the State Department. I have to believe it was probably driven by the Office of Management and Budget and as part of a government-wide effort. And I think they may have picked the State Department because it is so small that it was a good trial balloon. But whether the decisions were made at state, I tend to doubt it. I suspect this was a White House-driven exercise.
Okay, Phil, the Washington Post reports that the administration wants to reduce staffing at USDA. I mean, it's the largest civilian agency, isn't it?
I don't know if it's the largest civilian agency. Could be. I mean, like I said, there are about 100,000 employees there. That may be one of the larger ones. Yeah.
I mean, anyhow, that the administration wants to cut staffing at the Department of Agriculture by 31%, by a third. How has that impacted, or how will that impact the Foreign Agricultural Service?
Yeah. Well, as I said, the FAS has only about 1,000 employees in total and about 650 to 700 Americans. Also, its mission is to promote exports of U.S. food and agricultural products. So in my recent discussion with somebody there, they have not had any RIFs yet. But that's, and as I heard Eric say when we served together in the American Foreign Service Association, is commonly thought, foreign policy has a very small domestic constituency when you look at it that way. And so in the case of agriculture, farmers are important, exports are important. And so FAS itself has not been hit itself, but the Agricultural Research Service and the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, which is both of which are technical organizations, have been hit. As has been in the press, some 1,300 veterinarians resigned and/or were fired from APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, and I know how important poultry and eggs are to the state of Georgia, and avian influenza. That was just a disaster, and they tried to bring some back. More importantly, the Agricultural Research Service, their budget was cut by some 75%. And it is that basic research in agriculture which has really solved global food security for the world. If you are hungry in the world today, it's because you are poor, with a few exceptions like the horrors of Gaza and so on. If you are hungry in the world today, it's because you don't have the money. And so, but to specifically answer your question, FAS has not been hit yet by big cuts in numbers, but their recruitment, I know, has been strictly constrained at the moment, looking maybe more at attrition rather than RIFs.
Okay, there's also, and just to go along the same line, there've been cuts at all the foreign affairs agencies. I mean, USAID has essentially been eliminated.
Yeah.
National Security Council has been reduced. What, it was 200 staffers who were reduced at the National Security Council. Voice of America has been reduced drastically. Eric, what are we as a nation losing when across the foreign affairs agencies there are severe cuts like this?
Well, yesterday, or I'm sorry, on Friday, when the layoffs were announced, the two senior analysts for Russia and Ukraine were laid off in the State Department's very small Bureau of Intelligence and Research. All of the career experts on Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe were kicked out of the National Security Council last month. It's fair to say that there may only be one or two people in the entire government left who can advise the president on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine based on deep knowledge, experience, understanding. That's dangerous. A similar thing is going on with the Middle East. I'm afraid the idea that you don't need experts, you don't need career people who have long experience to advise the political leadership is a huge mistake, and we're going to pay for it when we have crises. The same thing is going on in the counterterrorism field. There were some lessons we thought we learned after 9/11. I personally think we probably overexpanded our counterterrorism operations after 9/11, but I think that's totally understandable given what happened to us. That there may have been a little bit of an overreaction, but some of the important lessons were that we were asleep at the switch, and we need to keep a real focus on terrorist threats. And, we've been laying off people right and left in that field. When, God forbid, an attack happens, who's going to be to blame? Well, I think that's going to be a fair question, because if you take away all the people who've been doing this and are there to advise our political leaders, we're sort of blinding ourselves, and I see that happening a lot.
Secretary Rubio says that the State Department is bloated. I mean, you alluded to that yourself, Eric. Is he wrong about bloat and mission creep at State Department?
Well, mission creep is a political issue. And the key point I would make is when a new president comes in, that president gets to set policy. And, if a president thinks that there are things that his predecessor was doing that he doesn't want to do or doesn't think we should have been doing, he's in charge. And, to say that we have to cut career people because there were things the State Department was doing that this president doesn't agree with makes no sense. Federal employees work for the federal government, and they do what they're told to do. And so you can move them, you can reassign them. I don't think there was bloat in terms of overall numbers. Yes, it's true the overall staff of the State Department has expanded, but that's for a lot of reasons. One of them, for example, is passport services, which, before 9/11, you didn't need a passport to go to the Caribbean, Canada, Mexico, etc. Now we have several million people on the Mexican border and several million on the Canadian border who cross every day. And all of them need passports and they need to renew their passports. And then a lot more Americans have been traveling. Well, who do you think does that? We had a crisis during COVID with inadequate staffing to do passports, and the American people were outraged that it was taking 6 to 8 months to get a passport. Well, that's been fixed partly by hiring a lot of people. Is that bloat? No, it's not bloat. It's services to the American people. And there are a lot of examples like that. I would agree that there was mission creep in some areas, but you just fix that because you're in charge and you decide what you're going to do. In some cases, you're required to consult with Congress. At last I noticed Congress, both houses are in control of the same party as the White House. So this should be doable. But overall, are the numbers too high? No, I don't think so. Again, vast majority of state-run employees are foreign citizens working overseas for our embassies and consulates. Most of them, except for Japan, Singapore, Western Europe, make a lot less than Americans, a lot less in many cases. And they deliver enormous results. So we're talking about a small number of people. Again, not much more than 20,000 Americans working in the State Department. And, that's a tiny little figure. And it's hard to even imagine how that could be bloat. That's my opinion based on almost 40 years.
Bill, in the private sector, people are laid off all the time. I mean, my son's been laid off. He's in his 30s and has been laid off twice, if I'm not mistaken. People are laid off because of the business environment, because of changes in corporate strategy, because of new technology. Do federal employees deserve to lifetime employment as long as there's no malfeasance? I mean, why shouldn't public employees be exposed to the same sorts of hiring and firing that the private sector is?
Well, I would say, I guess with respect, that's I think a commonly held trope that a lot of Americans have. As I think you mentioned or before, all Foreign Service officers go through an annual rigorous review process where each of us in a class are ranked by a committee. And if you are a low performer, you can be removed from the Foreign Service. Now, if you're performing well, why would you want to get rid of good people? And so, as Eric was mentioning, we all move around the world. We develop expertise, and we develop relationships not only with each other but with foreign counterparts. We develop relationships with the officials in other countries. And as we start early, and maybe this has happened to you, Charles, spending your career in Latin America, somebody you met as a junior officer later becomes a vice minister or even the minister of that country. And so the entree that you get from having spent your career with them and rising along with them can be tremendously important in improving the effectiveness. It's like, to say that, well, somebody should just be fired for some other reason because now they've, last week they had spent a career in Russia and now they've moved to the Middle East and we no longer like that, so we're just going to fire them. It makes absolutely no sense. It would be like, do you want your heart surgeon to be fired just because somebody thinks there are too many doctors when they've been a renowned heart surgeon for the last 20 years? I mean, it really is, it's not, as the old saying is, not a good way to run a railroad.
And Charles, could I just add, this is also about the rule of law. Should federal employees have not necessarily lifetime tenure, because the Foreign Service is like the military and law enforcement. People have to get promoted every few years or they have to leave, and there's a retirement age of 65, and most people don't reach that. But should they have a job if they perform well? Well, that's what United States law says. And you can change the law. That has to be Congress, both houses agreeing to change the law, and then the president has to sign the change in law. If you want to change that, then the president needs to go to the Congress, which, as I noted, is controlled both houses by his party, and say, I want to change the law. Now, he's tried to do that in some cases, and guess what? The Republican Congress has pushed back on a lot of that. But the bottom line is the law right now says exactly that. It does allow for layoffs, it does allow for RIFs, but the concept is if you're a good performer and you're hired as a federal employee, unless your function, and in the case of the civil service, that can be a specific function, but as Phil was saying in the Foreign Service, not really. Unless your function is no longer needed, yes, you have tenure, and by the way, so do unionized employees in the private sector. There are not a lot of them anymore. But the federal government was unionized by President Nixon in conjunction with the Democratic and Republican Congresses, starting in 1972. That is still the law as well, which this administration has tried to override. So fundamentally, you can't just say on a whim, I don't like what the law says. You have to change the law if you don't like it. That has not happened.
Okay, as Foreign Service officers, sort of our mantra is, we've developed this expertise. We give the best advice we can to our ambassador, to the decision makers in Washington, ultimately to the president. Then the president makes the decision, and our job is to carry that out. From each of your perspectives, and you first, Eric, how would you implement the president's decision to reduce staffing at state, agriculture, and elsewhere in the foreign affairs community?
Well, first of all, I have to say in almost 40 years of federal service, I never once saw a career employee try to sabotage or undermine or not fulfill the policy of a president of the United States. And I first worked for President Reagan starting in 1985. So that's a trope, to use Phil's word, that I think is absolutely false. And what I've seen is true professionalism and patriotism and dedication, and that includes carrying out the policy of the administration in office elected by the American people. So what I would have recommended was following the existing rules and regs, which did allow for reduction in force for layoffs, but it was fundamentally based on track record, on performance reviews, on skills, on experience. Not the way it was done in a rushed way with a change to the regs that makes no sense. You can agree with the goal without agreeing with the way it's done. I don't actually agree with the goal, but it wouldn't, if I were still serving on active duty, that's not my decision. But how it's done is important, and this has not been done well.
Phil, now what would you add?
I can't improve upon what Eric said. I would do it exactly the same way in the Foreign Ag Service or in the Department of Agriculture. There are always things we can do better, and shifting people around and changing these, and letting some go, that can be done in certain areas. What I do want to, though, pick up on is just the impact of these policies overall with agriculture, but more generally. And that is that we are doing damage to our reputation with our other countries. One of the, in my 33 years with the Department of Agriculture, what always was so nice is to go into any kind of meeting and have just that respect of the U.S. being there, and the belief and the commitment that the U.S. is following rule of law, its commitments under the WTO. Not every country does that. And I wish I had a nickel for every time a Chinese official said to me, can you tell me, why does the United States follow the rules of the World Trade Organization when it doesn't suit your interest? You're the largest and most important country. You don't have to follow those rules. Why do you? And they have worked very hard to not follow those rules themselves. But to undermine our credibility by pulling back when we compromise our beliefs in science and these principles and anything having to do the rule of law, we do ourselves grievous hurt, both at home and abroad.
Thanks. We're going to questions from the audience. So if you've not submitted your questions, please do so. We've got a bunch of them, which I appreciate. Carrie Bass asked, and I'm going to rephrase the question a little bit, is how should State Department Foreign Agriculture Service, which I'm guessing most people had not heard of until 25 minutes ago, how do you better communicate to the American people what it is that the foreign affairs agencies do and how they benefit from it, so that there's more support for the activities of the foreign affairs community?
Would you like me to start?
Yeah,
Go
sure.
ahead, Eric.
Sure. So, to some extent, this is a failure of not just this president and not just this administration, but I would say going back to the end of the Cold War, when we decided that we had won the Cold War, we had won it essentially on the cheap. I mean, it wasn't on the cheap because we spent trillions of dollars and lost tens of thousands, more than 100,000 lives of American soldiers over the years in Korea and Vietnam. So it wasn't on the cheap during the Cold War. But once the Soviet Union fell apart, we basically declared victory, shut down most of our efforts, not only to explain to the world where we were coming from, but also to the American people. And the message to the American people was, you don't have to worry about this anymore. The Cold War is over. There's no more military threat. We're going to have this peace dividend. We're going to spend it on domestic needs. We're the only superpower. The world is going our way. There's no other system left in the world to follow. Everybody's going to follow our lead. That was the message in the 1990s, and that message continued until fairly recently. And so, the American people are responsible for making their own decisions based on their information. But there has been a failure to speak candidly to the American people by all of our leadership over multiple administrations, to say, our prosperity and our security has been built on engagement with the world. And that includes spending money on defense, spending money on diplomacy, spending money on engagement with the world. And, we've slashed that to the point where we're really no longer able to play that role. There are Americans who say, we don't want to play that role. We want to pull back the United States, Fortress America, isolationism. That debate has to happen. That's a political debate. But I think this has been going on for about 30 years. And the American people have really not been given enough information to understand the stakes that are involved.
I would say, whatever general it was, you guys could tell me that if you don't spend more money on diplomacy, you're going to spend more money on bombs.
That was
Mattis, and thank you. And that is so true. And it is a mystery. And I think by the fact that all of your members here, anybody listening, World Affairs Council, cares a lot about diplomacy and already understands its importance. But, what is the mandate, or who cares about world peace? Well, we all do, but is that really, is that going to be the thing that drives your vote? Or the priorities in the government? In agriculture, sometimes we can be more narrowly defined, but even then, people think exports are good. But is the best way to throw a lot of more money into agricultural subsidies or not? Well, that's something that we can, that's up for debate. But do we want to have an open system where we're pushing countries to abide by the rule of law, where we want trade regulations to be based on science and not on politics and protectionism? Those are very important. And how we get that information out, maybe it starts in school, but it also is there with in the reporting and in the media that we all try to consume. That it's a tough one, and it's a mystery, I think, for a lot of us.
And Charles, if I could just add, this is a classic, but when you ask people in polling, what percentage of our federal budget do we spend on foreign aid, foreign affairs, all of that. People come up with things like 25%, 20%, 30%. We spent about 1%, and that was before USAID was abolished and most of our foreign assistance was canceled. It's a tiny amount of money, and it's not a place. I mean, one of the arguments I would make, if you're concerned about the federal deficit and you're concerned about our national debt, this is not a place you're going to find much money to fix that.
Sorry,
Go
Eric, and I think the
Go
other half of that statistic is very important. People would say, yeah, we spend too much. We think it's about 20 or 22. What should we spend? And they say, well, maybe 10, which is 10 times what we have been spending.
Right.
A retired FSO and good friend Michael Borstein asks the following. What has been or will be the domestic impact economically from the closure of USAID in Florida, Michael's in Sarasota? It is estimated that up to 19,000 jobs will be lost. Faith-based organizations in Florida will also suffer through cancellation of grants. Do either of you have the knowledge to be able to answer that?
I mean, I don't have Florida specific knowledge, except that, Florida is still an agricultural state, less than it was. And our ag exports, and this is where I'll defer to Phil, obviously are an important part of this picture, but also, this whole series of cuts are dramatically affecting our domestic economy. For example, what's going on now with foreign students is killing American higher education. If whatever state you're in the United States, and you're mostly in Georgia, your state colleges and universities subsidize American students with foreign students who pay out-of-state tuition. It's just a fact. Practically every university and college in the United States. Those students are going away. That cost is going to be borne by American parents and American students. Tourist industry is being killed by the loss, not just of Canadians, but by tourists from all over the world, who frankly feel they're being told, we really don't want you to come. And this is dramatically affecting Canada, not just the loss of Canadians. Michael probably knows more detail about this, but the loss of Canadians in Florida is going to be devastating and cost a lot of jobs.
And for me, more than the domestic economic impact, as tragic as that is for the thousands now of our colleagues who have lost their jobs, and the attendant cuts in funding to all of those NGOs, is the damage again to America as the Good Samaritan of the world, as one who cares and puts money behind programs which have fed and clothed and healed millions of people by this time. There is a reason why around the world you can find Eisenhower, Roosevelt, Kennedy streets. You don't find Mao Zedong Plaza anywhere in the world. And for us to retreat from this, again, the Good Samaritan, that has won us so much goodwill in so many countries around the world, among our allies and even among others we don't necessarily consider allies. With the CDC, the NIH programs, all of these things, they've just been tremendously important. And for us to turn our backs on that is, I think, seen by the rest of the world. Many of them, colleagues I've spoken with, foreign colleagues, just shaking their heads. And the cruelty in the way this is done has really been distressing, I think, for many of us, and I hope for most Americans.
Ramona Houston asks, what's your assessment of since entire bureaus, offices were eliminated, what's your assessment of the areas that were eliminated? In other words, what is the through line? Why these areas? What's the global impact of the cuts in these areas?
Phil, do you want to go first?
Well, I mean, as I would say, I kind of just see above for what I just said. I think to me is is the damage to the reputation and the capacity of America in the global community. To me, is the biggest is one of the biggest impacts, and it is something that we can perhaps retrieve, but it is going to be tough, and the knowledge that this could perhaps happen again is going to make people a little less able to trust America. It's something we're going to have to earn back.
But why, I guess I'm asking behind the question, why was the Refugee Bureau eliminated? What other full offices or bureaus were eliminated? I mean, what do you see behind that?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
If I could just add to what Phil said first, we don't have the ability to continue to lead the world without paying for it and without engaging. And it is true that no other country, China included, really wants to supplant our role in the world. So if you're saying we're going to pull back, we're going to cut funding, we're not going to have the same engagement with the world, we don't want to do that anymore. The worst case scenario is not, the Chinese move in, which they are moving in Africa and other places. Certainly when we got rid of USAID, the Chinese have filled that vacuum already in many places. But what we're talking about is chaos, and the entire international paid for it to a great extent, but to our own benefit, is going to be gone. The question of why we limit this is ideological stuff. The administration has decided that refugees are foreigners, and in general, they don't want foreigners coming to this country. That is totally at odds with our history. It's totally at odds with what I believe to be our values. It's also totally at odds with our best interests. I mean, we created the atom bomb that ended World War II because of refugees. We literally could not have done it with American-born people. Impossible. Never would have happened. That's how we won World War II at the end with Japan. There was a refugee named Einstein. I think his coming here was kind of beneficial to us. There are millions of stories like that. More importantly, there's international law that says that every country is required to consider refugees for admission. Not if they already have found a refuge in another safe country. There are all sorts of laws and rules, but this is about international law and obligations. So eliminating the Refugee Bureau with the asterisk that the administration has basically said the only refugees we want right now are white South African Afrikaner farmers because they're being oppressed. And I won't go further into that except to say, I certainly am dismayed by that. But that's an ideological decision. Same with mostly eliminating the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. The administration had some ideological objections to some of the work that Bureau was doing, including in things like women's empowerment. But, as the president and as the elected administration, they can change what we do overseas. There's no issue there. There's more, again, of an ideological point saying we don't want to be doing democracy and human rights promotion overseas. That's not our business. We need a more, you can call it pragmatic or realpolitik approach to the world, transactional approach. Again, that's the administration's right to do, but it needs to be candid with the American people that that's what we're doing. We are basically pulling back from advocating for human rights around the world, including in the most egregious places like China and Myanmar and Sudan. I mean, the administration has been silent. So that's an ideological decision. But then, they've just been cutting mindlessly. So, for example, there was a small office in our Personnel Bureau at State that was called the Office of Casualty Assistance. And there were about 3 people there, and their full-time job was to support families whose loved ones died in service to our country overseas, civilian service. And they've all been laid off. And when people have asked, well, who's going to help the families? Who's going to handle the deaths of our employees overseas when they die in service to our country? The answer is, well, someone else will do it. We'll figure it out. Why would you lay those people off? It's a very good question. And that's why I say this has just been done terribly in terms of just common sense, among other things.
We're at the short question, short answer stage here. Lizanne Stevenson asks, in addition to Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle East, are there critical areas that I mean, this is a policy question. The critical areas we're not paying enough attention to. Where will the next crisis be?
I mean, my quick answer, and Charles, I think you'll endorse this. I mean, one of them is the Western Hemisphere, is Latin America. We are essentially ruining our relations with our two close neighbors, Mexico and Canada, upon which much of our prosperity is based. But also, we have these enormous multi-thousand mile borders, which, yes, have had problems with illegal immigration, but they're among the most peaceful borders in world history. But then when you go further south to Central America and South America, we're asleep at the switch. We're really not engaging. And frankly, the message is it's unimportant and we don't care. And that certainly could blow up in our face as it has in the past. Southeast Asia is another good example. Secretary of State Rubio just went to the summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in Kuala Lumpur. He cut short his trip. He was also supposed to go to Japan and South Korea and all that. He cut short his trip and flew back to the US. And while he was at this summit, he basically didn't make time to meet with almost any of the Southeast Asian leaders. He met with the Russian foreign minister, he met with the Chinese foreign minister, which is not unusual. You need to take advantage of these opportunities. But to be honest, it's all over the media now. Pretty much all of Southeast Asia, it feels very insulted and neglected. And by the way, that's a really critical place in the world, including countries like Singapore, both strategically and economically. So, that's an area of potential trouble. And then, the last piece I would say is, we could end up with a nuclear war in South Asia between Pakistan and India. It's the most likely place that we could see a nuclear war, God forbid, in our lifetimes. And I don't see any effort at engagement there, any sense that we're paying attention or are concerned. So that worries me a lot too.
Let me just say one quick thing here, Charles, and that is just to correct a misimpression. Our actually two largest agricultural markets are Canada and Mexico. China comes in number 3 right now. So that just underscores, despite those relatively smaller population. And I think we can't leave Africa out of this. And Africa is just, a mass, and it's a bunch of different cultures and so on, as people know. But given the demographics and other things, Africa's another place that we should be paying more attention to.
I mean, there's a question about Africa that I don't have time to ask, and I appreciate you bringing that in. The last question I asked is from Anna Petrova, who's a friend, former intern, and she's asking a question that a lot of people, are asking right now, and essentially is all these people who studied international relations, who want to join the Foreign Service, who are interested in careers in the foreign affairs communities, what should they do?
Well, what's most tragic about this moment is we are really driving away the next generation. We are saying, first of all, there's a hiring freeze. The Foreign Service exam has been suspended. Everybody's watching these layoffs. Everybody's watching the total destruction of USAID. We have thousands of people now looking for work who may not find it in their field, including the people laid off, never mind the new people coming up, like someone who's your former intern. But the message is also very negative about federal service. It's like, don't serve your country. It's, the deep state, it's bureaucratic, it's against American values. If you want to, be a successful person, you need to, go make money or something like that. And of course, we need the private sector. It drives our economy. So that's important. I'm not denigrating that at all. But we also need idealistic people who want to serve their country. And, I can tell you, if you come to the State Department and go to the lobby, the main lobby on C Street in DC, we have hundreds of names on the wall of people who gave their lives for our country over several hundred years, serving in the U.S. Foreign Service. And, those were true patriots living, when you look at what they died from, not just terrorism, but, malaria and tuberculosis and war and plane crashes and all of that. And, they did it voluntarily. And to say to young people, there's no future for you serving our country, I think it's tragic. I hope we can turn this around. I'll do my part but we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you both, Eric and Phil. This has been useful, interesting, and timely conversation. And as we scheduled this not knowing that these layoffs were going to happen last Friday. And so I want to thank you both. I also, if I can, want to thank Dan Agboga, who is the producer of this show and has been super helpful, and Nadia Rusika, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, at AFSA, but especially the two of you for taking the time to do this. Ricky, I'm going to turn this over to you.
And thank you, Ambassador Shapiro, for leading this conversation entitled Diplomacy Disrupted, How Cuts to U.S. Agencies Are Reshaping Foreign Policy. Thank you to our speakers, to our producer, Dan. This conversation is part of a series that we're doing here at the World Affairs Council of Atlanta called Beyond Borders, and it's focusing on the United States' ongoing foreign policy redirects. Our featured speakers, of course, were Eric Rubin and Philip Shull, and this discussion was brought to you by the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, but we would also like to recognize several partners today. Thank you to the World Affairs Council of Tennessee, the World Affairs Council of Jacksonville, and the World Affairs Council of San Antonio, and of course, welcome to any of our council members from around the country who are joining from those communities. You will be able to find a video of today's dialogue posted on our YouTube channel. Please mark your calendars for 2 upcoming programs that are part of this series on U.S. foreign policy. In 2 weeks, on Wednesday, July 30th, we'll be having a program called Cuba at a Crossroads, Why U.S. Policy Still Matters, featuring 2 former diplomats. And on Sunday, yes, a Sunday, August 24th, please join us for Greenland and the Geopolitics of the Arctic, featuring the head of mission of Greenland's representation in Denmark, a person who's in high demand right now for programs like this, along with 2 climate policy experts. Both of these programs are scheduled for noon Eastern on their respective days, July 30th and August 24th. You can register right now at our website, wacatlanta.org. That website is also where you can subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on upcoming programs. Thank you to those of you who joined us today and to those who submitted questions. We look forward to seeing you at a future program, either online or in person. Thanks for joining us and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.